Thank you for joining us today. Kamden Kuhn is joining us in the studio for the first part of our program, and then we're going to talk with Tom and Christina Olson. They were here last year with Kamden just about a year ago, right, Kamden?
Yep, about exactly a year
Almost
ago.
to the date, sharing their story of their struggle with ALS, or Lou Gehrig's disease. Now, Kamden Kuhn is the Public Relations Director for the ALS Association Florida chapter. Welcome.
Thank you for having me.
You know, we were going to mention it at the end, but we should probably mention it here at the beginning and then at the end about the ALS walk that's coming up.
Yeah, we're so excited about it. It's our Walk to Defeat ALS, and this is really the fundraiser that gives the ALS Association the funds to do our mission for really the whole next year. So it's a really important event for us. It's coming up on March 6th at TY Park in Hollywood, so we're really excited.
March 6th. Now, what does it involve? If people want to get involved, what do they do?
It's a lot like your traditional walkathon. It's a really uplifting event. You see a lot of ALS patients there, a lot of families who have lost a loved one to ALS. They do about a 2-mile walk, but it's really important. We try to get everybody to register beforehand at walktodefeatals.org. walktodefeatals.org. They can register there, sign up their team, get their whole friends and get all of their friends and family involved, and then come out on March 6th and just really have a great time.
It is an insidious disease, isn't it? The more you read about it, the more you hear about it, and of course we'll talk with Tom and Christina. It's a rough go.
It is. It's just an awful disease, really. Most people, I think, know it as Lou Gehrig's disease. The long version is amyotrophic lateral sclerosis. But when people hear that they have ALS, they're really receiving a death sentence. It's absolutely awful. They lose their mobility piece by piece, gradually losing their ability to walk, speak, eat, eventually breathe. And ultimately, the prognosis is death within 2 to 5 years. It's awful.
It's a total loss of muscle control. But is it a disease of the brain, that the brain just does not send signals any longer?
That is what is so unique about ALS, is that your brain remains completely aware of everything that's going on around you, sharp and acute. It's just that it's no longer communicating with the muscles. So we've had a lot of patients tell us it's like being trapped in your own body. You can't speak. You can't say I love you. You can't say I need a glass of water. But you know all of these things. It's difficult to communicate it when you can't move and you can't speak, especially in the later stages when it's progressed.
There's a lot of information on your website, and that was the same website you just gave. But what is the website again?
The website for the walk is walktodefeatals.org.
But the ALS website?
The ALS, our chapter website is als-florida.org. So we have a separate website for our walk, but we have a ton of information about patient services on the als-florida.org.
Really is. There's an awful lot of information. It was, and the terminology kind of threw me. It says it was first described by neurologists all the way back in the 1800s, right?
Right. We've known about it since then, since the 1800s, but it was really just... it just became more popular in the 1930s when that famous guy Lou Gehrig got it and gave that speech that we all remember and have seen on TV when he said, "Today I consider myself the luckiest man on the face of the earth." And it was really just then that it came on the scene and doctors started to combat it more prominently.
And it really was featured. There really was no, of course, the long name for it, but there really was no shortened name for it. Consequently, most people had never heard of it.
Exactly. Awareness has always been a struggle for our organization, even in recent years, because it's a disease that's only affecting about 7 per 100,000 people. It's not an orphan disease. It is still basically prevalent. However, because not everyone knows somebody with ALS, awareness is a struggle for us, and it's something that we're constantly fighting to get the public more knowledgeable so that they can get involved.
Is it a disease that is on the increase, or is it, if it is on the increase, is it just because it's diagnosed sooner?
I think our numbers have remained pretty consistent throughout the recent years. However, one interesting tidbit is that we know that military veterans are twice as likely to get ALS over somebody who never served, which is very interesting and intriguing because we know that it's probably something environmental that is triggering something genetic, some kind of genetic mechanism that's making this disease come on to its victims. And like later we'll talk to Tom Olson. He is a veteran, and he's one of those that was at an increased risk to develop ALS.
But nothing has been determined through research as to what it could possibly be.
That is still a mystery. And the Department of Defense, I know, is funding research every year to find out, to pinpoint what is it that's causing this increased risk. We know it's there through multiple studies, like the VA, Harvard. These organizations have been able to establish this risk. However, what is that factor that's causing it? That is still unknown, and that's something that researchers are trying to get a handle on.
Is it difficult to diagnose?
It is, and that is because there's not one test that's we're going to, do some kind of blood test or something,
Right,
and then we
right.
know you have ALS. That doesn't exist. What they have to do is rule out all other diseases. And I know one patient who was recently talking to me, he said the doctor told him that they had narrowed it down to either MD or ALS. And he said he knew when he was hoping he had muscular dystrophy that he knew it was bad.
Well, that's a rough road right there. To have those, well, you don't have a choice, but to be told that.
Absolutely. But that's what it comes down to. It's ruling out all of these other diseases until that ALS must be the only thing that's explaining the symptoms.
What are some of the early symptoms? Because it is difficult to diagnose. Are they kind of the same symptoms that would go along with a lot of other diseases or syndromes?
They're a little bit unique. A lot of times it starts off as a muscle twitch in an arm or a leg. It could increase to muscle fatigue. A lot of time we see slurred speech when ALS is beginning to impact the speech. Like I said, a lot of tiredness, maybe tripping and falling. These muscular type of symptoms are often what we see at the onset.
We talked about the life expectancy. How many people in America suffer with ALS?
Currently, there are about 30,000 people in the U.S., and what that boils down to is one person being diagnosed with ALS every 90 minutes. And then on top of that, one person dies every 90 minutes. So the ALS population is always remaining
About the same.
The same, exactly. And that's why awareness is an issue, because for every person that's diagnosed, somebody is dying. So our population is never increasing. We're never seeing more faces with ALS because, unfortunately, they're passing away.
Yeah. We're speaking with Kamden Kuhn, who is a public relations director for the ALS Association Florida chapter. And, of course, ALS first received national attention because of baseball great Lou Gehrig. And I look at a list, Kamden, that was on your website, other famous people who have lost their lives to ALS. Baseball pitcher Jim Catfish Hunter, actor David Niven, boxing champion heavyweight, I think he was a light heavyweight champion, Ezzard Charles, Joe Stone, who's the co-creator of Sesame Street. They talk about biological mechanisms that cause ALS. Does that mean it's hereditary?
10% of all cases of ALS are hereditary. They're genetic.
But that's only 10%.
You're right. 90% of people with ALS, it's sporadic. It's coming on without, like we talked about before, without scientists really knowing why. Fortunately, we do know of about 3 genes that we can pinpoint and say we know that these genes can cause ALS, and that those have been some significant research advances. But again, that only explains about 10% of the cases.
Now, is that something where a person could receive a test to test genes to see if you have that gene? Does that mean if you have that gene, you are going to suffer from ALS?
There is genetic testing available. However, like you said, you could get this test and just be a carrier of the gene, and that gene would never develop. Also, you could receive the test and not have evidence of the gene and still develop ALS. So while there is genetic testing, it's not, and I actually have ALS in my family. My grandfather passed away of ALS, and I have never wanted to get the test. You know, who really want, if you are carrying the gene, first of all, it's not definitive, but second of all, I mean, that's a gloomy future if you're hanging that over your head.
And what good would it do? I mean, possibly to plan ahead, or for just a circumstance that could happen? Yeah, that would be something difficult hanging over your head.
Absolutely. And again, it's not definitive. So while that testing is available, it doesn't necessarily mean you will or will not develop